Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask Ira Live. I'm Emma Kate Austin here with Ira Winderman. So glad to be back already. Pretty quick turnaround on this one, but a lot has been happening with the Heat. They've been plagued by a bunch of injuries, unfortunately, which has been a huge problem. One of them, Dion Waiters, he's out again with an ankle injury. So let's start with him.
Sure.
Since he is out again, are he and the Heat at a crossroads at this point with all the injuries?
Yeah, it's interesting. We thought we were past this, end of last season, those final 13 games. But here's where it sort of took a twist. You had a player who was an impending free agent. You have surgery. They told him, if you have the surgery, you could miss up to the first half of next season. Well, obviously, Dion wanted to cash in. He wanted to get the money. So he said, I'm fine. I'll rehab. I want to tell teams when I come back, this is the recent ankle injury. When I came back from my previous ankle injury, I'm good. The Heat work with them 4 years, $52 million, built-in incentive bonuses, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes here, about trying to get him to play more games. And now all of a sudden, it's an issue again. He's out before the Christmas break. He's now out after the Christmas break. You don't know where you stand. And here's the irony of the entire situation. If Dion Waiters had the ankle surgery and was 100% right now, this would be about the time frame he's coming back in. So yes, he was here, the start of the season, he was able to push through it, but now all of a sudden when you want to make your move, NBA season, as you know from the Christmas Day games, the thought is the NBA season begins after Christmas. You position yourself early, make it sense for the Heat, get to 500, one game over, then you make your move. Now all of a sudden you're without your starting shooting guard, you don't know where he stands exactly. This is a concern of mine. Here's the thing. As an outsider, it's easy for me to say he should have had the surgery. It's not easy for me to say, but he had a $52 million decision to make. I totally understand that a lot of fans have written me saying, hey, this guy had an obligation to the Heat. Well, no, he was a free agent. The interesting thing I always find is this. We always get the press release after surgery. So-and-so underwent successful surgery today, because they always say that. What if this was the case? Dion has the surgery in May or in June, and the release is Dion had surgery today that went horribly wrong. He's not getting his $52 million, so I understand now we're at this crossroads. The Heat have said he's going to be on ice, literally and figuratively, until he gets this right. And now all of a sudden, you're in the stretch run of the season. Christmas Day, the official restarting date of the NBA with those games, and now the Heat moving forward. And now you don't know again. You have to hope the ankle gets right. Remember, the surgical option was going to be 3 to 6 months. If he uses the surgical option now, you've lost this entire season. One of those 4 years at $52 million, and then you have the bonus and other things to figure in also.
So should the Heat have been more cautious, I should say, with that contract approach? 4 years, $52 million?
That's the thing. Is on one hand, you work with someone. You say you have their best interest at hand. So you have to sort of say, you're one of ours, we embrace you. They had enough of a medical report to know that it looks like through rest, that was one of the possible options. They knew that Dion would push through also, and he has. He reported to training camp. He said he didn't feel the best, but he played, and he didn't miss a game. He missed 2 games at the start of the season for his birth of his daughter. I think we'll all allow him to have that.
That's all right.
That's fine. Family time is fine. You can have paternity leave, you can have maternity leave. I have no problem with that. I don't mind the contract as much, but you know what, Emma Kate? You're going to reach a point where you have to say, we have to get this right. If rest is the answer now, if when we're here back next week and we're saying, hey, he's back on the court, all is good, have no issue with that. If this becomes week to week to week, you've got to get your lineup set. Every player, as we've spoken about with this team, has a unique skill set. So what skill sets are you playing to? Whose game? Is it the streak shooting of Dion Waiters? Is it the athleticism of Tyler Johnson? The consistency of Josh Richardson? Are you going to have to play the young guys, Derek Walton Jr. in his two-way, maybe even Matt Williams from Central Florida with his outside shooting? You have to get a sense of your team. Should the Heat have been more cautious? I don't think the Heat had a lot of choices. Didn't have a lot of money to spend in free agency. They went with it. They have to hope this is a sooner rather than later injury.
Absolutely. And he, like you mentioned, he's been pretty inconsistent, uneven this season. So is this about more than just his ankle?
Well, I think it's mostly about the ankle, but you look at the graphic here. So this is not the first time it's come up. Mid-season last year, brief injury. End of last season, remember, the Miami Heat missed the playoffs in a tiebreaker. So if he was back for maybe one more of those games, we'd be talking about last season's playoffs. So you have that at hand. Now he's out indefinitely. Eric Spoelstra came back after the Christmas break and he said he is off the court. We are going to wait till we get this right. I think what's going to be really interesting is, what if all of a sudden plans B and C maybe Tyler Johnson and Josh Richardson or other players step forward. And remember, Rodney McGruder's waiting in the wings. He had that leg surgery prior to the start of the season. All of a sudden, he's working his way back. Rodney is absolutely pushing. When they told Rodney McGruder, this is a 3 to 6 month recovery, Rodney McGruder only heard the first number. Rodney McGruder said, okay, it's a 3-month recovery. And you talk to Eric Spoelstra, and he'll tell you no one is working harder. The one thing the Heat won't do is ever put an end date on an injury. They don't want to say this guy will be back at a certain time. They did it with Hassan Whiteside. They said this is a 1 to 2 week rehab. All of a sudden it became 3 weeks, then 4 weeks before we now have finally good news we'll get to later in the show. So I think with Dion, you have to slow play it right now because there is no plan B. If he has to have the surgery, Dion Waiters, I believe, his season will be over. You'll have lost all of that. So you have to try to find a compromise. Right now, they're saying X-rays negative, which they usually are, MRI negative, that's a good sign also. But you know what? If you don't feel right and you can't be the same player, they paid $52 million Dion Waiters. What are they getting out of Dion Waiters? So basically, we wait to see when he comes back. We wait to see who he is. It's really been a roller coaster.
Absolutely. So what do you think his future is with this team in seasons to come? Especially when you, like you said, Josh Richardson and Tyler Johnson playing so well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, so on one hand, you might say to yourself, well, you know what? I don't want to say it's a silver lining. But what if Tyler Johnson is playing very well lately? Josh Richardson, after a really up and down November, has had a terrific December. So you say to yourself, well, we got our small forward, we got our starting shooting guard, Tyler Johnson finally starting with Dion out. Maybe one of the young kids comes around. But the problem is, if Dion's not playing, how do you trade him off for someone else? How do you tell another team that our injury problem won't be your injury problem? And he had such an up and down career anyway. So it's really odd. You have to, on one hand, showcase Dion Waiters to another team to show that he's a valuable commodity. And on the other hand, that means actually getting him on the court. This is a tough, tough spot for the Miami Heat. My sense is, after the uneven time with Cleveland, the uneven time with Oklahoma City, I think for better or worse, they are married right now. I think for better or worse, these 4 years for Dion will be played out with the Miami Heat. So they might as well get him healthy anyway. He's their choice. He's going to be their guy, I believe, for 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to some more injury questions in the mailbag, which we'll move to now because there's lots of questions, especially with Hassan Whiteside. So Al asks, will the Miami Heat roster ever be healthy again? And I think we have some good news in terms of Whiteside.
Good timing, Al. I mean, really, until literally hours before this taping, I wasn't sure. All of a sudden now, Hassan Whiteside, it was fascinating. This is someone who's missed 13 games with the bone bruise on his left knee, had missed 5 before with the bone bruise. We've seen him in a variety of blazers and sports coats, and I know when we get to our fashion segment, we'll talk about that a little bit also, including the check blue version he had the other day. But he's finally ambulatory again. Over the Christmas break, even though the Heat did not have a full practice, they decided we're going to roll him out. And Emma Kate, I think there's a really interesting backstory here. The game before the Christmas break, the Heat players in the locker room were asked about James Johnson coming back from his bursitis on his ankle. They were asked about Goran Dragic wearing that elbow sleeve on his left shooting arm and pushing through. And Wayne Ellington told us after that game, before it opened to media in the locker room, the players thanked those two. And they told those two players, we know you're not 100%, but you just being out here is inspiration to us. Well, remember, when Hassan was out, and they originally said 1 to 2 weeks, then it became 3 weeks, then it became 4 weeks, he said, I'm not coming back until I'm 100%. It's really interesting. You always try not to read into other people's words. But as they say, I'm not so sure they weren't throwing a little shade in Hassan's direction. Yeah. I'm not so sure they weren't saying this. James Johnson is out here at 60%. Goran Dragic is out here at 70%. And you're waiting for 100%. And the one thing you always hear from NBA veterans is this. No one's 100%. It is too grueling a schedule, even though they've eased it up this year. It is too physical a game to wait until you're perfect. I honestly think that resonated. It almost reminds me of a sort of one of those Christmas movies, where you're getting that voice in there that you have to do more, you have to do better. Hassan, get yourself back on the court. And I think Hassan took the message. It'll be interesting to see in these initial games how much he has to offer. Here's an odd point. You'd almost say this is the opposite of the Dion Waiters situation. If Hassan Whiteside comes out and limps through these first few games, you might say to yourself, wow, he came out too early. He didn't wait. I'm the opposite. I know this sounds odd. I would love to see Hassan limping. That would tell me that Hassan knew he wasn't 100%, but he realized 90%, 80% Hassan out there is still enough. Because when you pay a player, and I know people hate when I turn this into money, but when you pay a player $24 million a season, you know what? If you can't be your $24 million self, I understand. This is a physical game, especially for big men. But be your $20 million self. Be your $18 million self. I think that message really has resonated from teammates to him. And this is interesting, Emma Kate. Beginning of the season, the Heat voted for their 3 tri-captains. So they selected Udonis Haslem. Of course, we know Udonis has been here all 15 seasons of his career. They selected Goran Dragic. They saw him lead Slovenia to the Eurobasket Championship. I mean, they were the ultimate underdog in that. They were like, I don't know, like the Sacramento Kings winning the NBA, what he did for them. And James Johnson, who just pushed through his ankle bursitis, now injured again. So those are the guys they picked. And I said at the time, isn't it interesting that the highest paid player on the team, in many ways the future of this team, was not selected as a captain? And I think this is one of those moments. If Hassan wants to get the respect of his teammates, if he wants to earn that, you go out there on one leg, not like Willis Reed necessarily for the Knicks in the championship series, but you show teammates that you're there for them. Goran Dragic, the day before the Christmas break, he was there for his teammates. James Johnson lasted only, I think, 8 minutes or so in his comeback. He's back shelved again. He can't play, but at least he tried. This is what you want to see from someone like Hassan Whiteside. Are you there with us? Give us 5 of your best minutes, 10 of your best minutes, but are you there with us? I think this is a very important moment in his professional career and as far as the respect goes in the locker room.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're all glad to see him back, and hopefully it'll be
and stay back.
Yes, exactly. All right, Trenton Orlando asks, what has gotten into Josh Richardson? This guy couldn't buy a basket in the beginning of the season, and now he's averaging almost over 20 points a game. Perhaps I was wrong about him.
You know, it's he's found his special place, so to speak. I think Josh Richardson, when he came into this league, remember, senior season at Tennessee, he was a point guard. He came into the Miami Heat mostly playing shooting guard. We've seen the roster evolve. Obviously, Goran Dragic was there. Dion Waiters was there. He had to move around. Now he's an undersized small forward. He was getting beaten up physically when you look at some of these matchups and some of the players he had to play against. He had to learn to be an NBA small forward. That, to me, was what the end of October, the beginning of November was about. Learn your special place in the NBA. And in December, he has taken off. He is back to being the scorer that he was at Tennessee. He shows you why everyone said this guy is the steal of the 2015 draft, number 40 out of Tennessee. His versatility. Instead of giving in to the factor that he's going to be undersized, underweight, he took advantage of his quickness, of his drive, his determination. And I got to say, we were talking about injuries there, whether it was Dion in the first segment, Hassan just in that previous question. There can be silver linings, and that's what Eric Spoelstra said. If Dion Waiters was not ailing, if Hassan Whiteside was not out, Josh Richardson might not ever have been able to explore these parts of his games, to get back to the player that he was at Tennessee. And now you're seeing it on the court for the Heat, and it's really interesting. And I wrote this in one of my more recent Ask Iras, as far as the Heat have had trouble finding a small forward for years. As a matter of fact, this was a feature I wrote on Christmas Day. They lost LeBron James in 2014 in the offseason. Well, you lose LeBron James, you're not immediately saying, well, here's the next best thing. Luol Deng comes in. They realize, nice small forward, better as a power forward. Okay, they drafted Justice Winslow. Well, he won a championship at Duke. He's going to be the answer. Except he can't shoot. And we're still seeing that. And he's struggling with that. Last season, Rodney Magruder, the erstwhile underdog, a placeholder type of player, can make the threes, a 3-and-D player, but in today's NBA, you need more. Then at the start of the season, the Heat said, well, we got injuries. Rodney Magruder is out. Justice Winslow is struggling with his outside shot. Sometimes it takes calamity. Sometimes it takes that moment when you have nowhere else to turn to and you find your answer. And I find it really interesting. LeBron James left this team in the 2014 offseason. I think it's taken 3 years. But I think the Heat would be very comfortable going forward saying, Josh Richardson is our starting small forward of the future. I think if Rodney Magruder comes back, he can play off the bench. And that's just going to lead to the question I think we've asked in the first 2 of these shows and will again in the future. What about Justice Winslow? But we'll save that for another day.
I love that. Kind of that next man up gives these other guys the opportunity to play and really improve, I think. And I think that's definitely the case of Josh here. But next question we have is asks about Michael Beasley, saying, Ira, I always knew Michael Beasley would come back to haunt us. His numbers in college were overwhelming. Did Pat Riley make a mistake by getting rid of him? I know it was to make more room for LeBron James, but we had 2 more chances with him.
I mean, you're talking about the 2008 draft. You're talking 9 years removed. If you could have cryogenically frozen Michael Beasley and waited until his maturity came together with his game and he fully learned the NBA, I'd have no issue with that. Remember, Michael Beasley was let go when they brought in Mike Miller for the Big Three team, when they wanted more of a complementary player. What Michael Beasley is doing right now for the New York Knicks is he's been given that opportunity, is he's been given the chance that he can go out, you can go ahead and be a scorer, you can be the man, you can sort of take over, whether it's actually playing defense like we're seeing here and working on both ends of the court. But you know what? This is what happens. Every team needs a featured scorer. So Carmelo Anthony is traded in the offseason. The Knicks don't have anyone to score. Michael can step in. To me, this is the classic case of this. Anyone can be a good player on a bad team. And there's a reason why guys who score a lot of points on bad teams aren't all-stars. You simply have to get someone. So when Kristaps Porzingis was injured, Michael Beasley could step in. When Enes Kanter couldn't play, Michael Beasley could step in. I still need to see one thing. Can Michael Beasley be a good player on a winning team? Because this is not just the Heat who let him go. Minnesota let him go. Phoenix let him go. Houston let him go. Milwaukee let him go. About a quarter of the league let him go. Those teams, almost all except for Phoenix, have gone on to become winning teams. To me, it's a lot more than just vacant and empty statistics. Can you make a team a winner? We have to see that. The Knicks are off to a good start. They've played almost exclusively a home schedule to this point. If Michael Beasley gets into the playoffs and Michael Beasley is scoring like he is now, then yeah, I think when we do our season wrap-up, hopefully in June or July after a long playoff run, we might look back as Michael Beasley is the one who got away. I think it's a little bit too early for that now.
So are Heat fans ever going to get over bypassing Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Love in the 2008 NBA draft?
You know, it's interesting because I would have said for sure that'll always sort of stick in their craw. And here's the thing. Before the 2008 draft, Pat Riley addressed us, and everyone thought the draft was the same. There was Derrick Rose, and there was Michael Beasley, 1 or 2 in either of those orders, and the other guys. And Pat Riley kept telling us, this is more than a 2-player draft. And we're like, oh, yeah, you're just trying to get someone to trade for your draft choice. You're selling us a bill of goods. You're doing what you do when you have the number 2 draft pick. As it turns out, there have been a bunch of quality players there, even Brook Lopez. Some of the other players selected later. O.J. Mayo out right now when his suspension might come back. But I don't think there'll necessarily be regret because of the player taken at number 1. And here's the deal. The Heat had the worst record in the NBA that year by far, 15-67. Chicago jumped them in the lottery. They move up, they get Derrick Rose. If Derrick Rose would have emerged as an all-time superstar, as the all-star he was early, then I think you could say to yourself, wow, you lost the lottery and it destroyed your franchise. The fact that we're sitting here right now, wondering if the Cleveland Cavaliers, Derrick Rose's 3rd team, can make it work for him, I think it's easier for Heat fans to sit back and realize the draft is a crapshoot. Sometimes you get lucky. As unfortunate as the Heat might have been with Michael Beasley, it's not like Chicago, for lack of a better expression, hit the lottery with Derrick Rose. Sometimes it's a matter of that player who comes forward. And that, Emma Kate, and we're going to get into this so much more when we get into the spring, is why Pat Riley refuses to tank, refuses to play for the lottery. Because the one season when Pat Riley sold his soul to the devil and said, we will be bad, and my gosh, they were bad. I mean, there were players like Sid Powell, Stefan Lazme, people you've never heard of, and that's good for you. It means you have a life. He played those kind of players. They finished with a terrible record, and there was no huge payoff. That's why when people go to me, Ira, why don't they tank? Ira, they're not going to make the playoffs. Because Pat Riley went in the tank one year, got Michael Beasley, and his life, unfortunately, was no better off for it.
It's not always the answer.
I always love to educate on Michael Beasley because that I think of all the parts of Heat history, of Big Three and championships, of Dwayne Wade and Alonzo Mourning and Shaquille O'Neal. There's always these people. Why don't the Heat tank? Why don't they go in the lottery? And now you have this abject lesson because there are Michael Beasleys out there. God bless him. A good player on a bad team, a 12th man on a good team. You have to be more than just hoping for lottery luck.
Absolutely. So you can definitely still submit your questions. We'll get to some more at the end of the show. Use hashtag AskIraLive on Twitter. Go on our website. Also on YouTube, you can make some questions there. Let's take a look back at your top 10 small forwards in Heat history.
And it's interesting because the name we just mentioned is not on this list. So, I mean, that's the thing. When they drafted Michael Beasley, everyone's like, oh, well, he's going to be one of the top small forwards in franchise history. Instead, it shows you actually have to produce. So we've been doing this. This is the Heat's 30th anniversary season. We've gone through the backcourt already. Some impressive names. Now we move to the front line in small forward. And so I'm going to line them up, do them reverse order. So if you're scoring at home, you can see if your name's in there. I'm going to go number 10 with Mike Miller. Charismatic player. And ironically, Emma Kate, the player that they traded Michael Beasley to open the salary cap money for was Mike Miller, who became a championship winning forward, something that obviously Michael Beasley is not. Bruce Bowen, the great defensive player, really a player who got away, goes to San Antonio, becomes a championship 3-and-D defensive small forward. His number is now retired in San Antonio. You can talk about players who get away. You can look back at that one. One of my favorite, Willie Burton, comes in here, scores like crazy. Here's the ultimate irony on Willie Burton. He holds the record for most points scored against the Miami Heat. They let him go. He went to a bad Philadelphia 76ers team. He set the record against the Heat as sort of one who got away. Willie was one of these players, when you needed a player most to come through for you and score when you were bad, he could give you points. It's almost like the Michael Beasley example. You can score, but can you be a winning player? That's where I always look at Willie Burton as.
Mm-hmm. And going back to Mike Miller, and it's been kind of the theme on some of these lists, is it's about that one moment that can really project a player on these lists. So for Miller, it was that Game 5, the 2012 NBA Finals.
First championship season, yeah.
Yeah, and he converted 7 3-pointers in that night, the most ever by a reserve.
Yeah, most by reserve in the NBA Finals. I mean, Mike Miller, and you can even see from these pictures, Mike Miller just had a good time. Mike Miller didn't have to be on a championship team. He realized he was playing a kid's game, and he had that unbelievable enthusiasm. One playoff series, his sneaker comes off, he keeps playing, drains a three-pointer. It's just who he is. He was the perfect sort of balance to the seriousness of LeBron James, the intellectualism of Chris Bosh, the drive of Dwayne Wade, and then Mike Miller from South Dakota just going out and having himself a good old time. He was the counterbalance they needed. That's why when we spoke about Michael Beasley and spoke about trading a player, you could see why they made a move, and you could see what he did. He was here for the first 2 championship teams, and then when they started selling off players to get below the luxury tax, he was the player who was let go. I honestly believe this, that among the reasons LeBron James left the Miami Heat in free agency in 2014 for the Cleveland Cavaliers was because the Heat let Mike Miller go. He was the player that LeBron wanted here. Mike Miller was very injury prone. The Heat had to save on the luxury tax. I am not so sure that if the Heat would have bit the bullet, not traded Mike Miller, that LeBron James well could have re-upped, and maybe he could have been our third guest here on the panel today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, bitter history.
Yeah, we can't do all the what ifs.
All right, let's continue our list. Heat, all-time top small forwards. We go to number 7 and Caron Butler, player who arrived just when needed. 2002 draft, the Heat were coming off lottery seasons. They needed a man. Caron Butler was expected to go far earlier, and then on draft nights, Caron Butler came from a hardscrabble background. There were talks of bullet fragments in his body, and you shouldn't draft him because he's injured, as if the guy hadn't been through a metal detector hundreds of times by then. Proved unfounded, but you know what? He fell to the Heat at number 10. They had no issue. Lamar Odom, another piece of history. Here's a player the Heat add as a free agent. They tried to go to the LA Clippers. They bombed in an offer sheet for Elton Brand, which you either have to match or let the player go. The Clippers said, we're keeping Elton Brand. The Heat, right after that, bombed in another offer sheet for Lamar Odom. Clippers didn't have the financial means to match. The Heat get Lamar Odom. You know about all his histories. We'll talk Kardashians at another time. You have all that going on. And in 1 year later, the Heat flip Lamar Odom for Shaquille O'Neal. So you can call it as cold as the NBA can be. Here you bring in a guy in free agency. He buys into the system. Part of a really, really fun 2003 Miami Heat team. They let him go for a year. But you could see when you have a chance for Shaquille O'Neal, you have to go all in. Number 5 on the list, Antoine Walker. Nothing but statistics for the Boston Celtics when he came into the NBA, and very little success. Well, the Heat decide a year after getting Shaquille O'Neal, we need complementary players. So Pat Riley goes out to the Memphis Grizzlies and the Boston Celtics, trades for Jason Williams and for Antoine Walker. And there was a thought, Emma Kate in South Florida, of why are you trading? I don't want to sound too cold here, but why are you trading almost for this loser kind of player? And instead, in that first season in, shooting his ridiculous tippy-toe three-pointers. The man did not jump. He was known for his defensive issues, and he led him to a championship. And again, I remember being in Dallas when they celebrated that championship. Both he and Jason Williams acquired that year with the big loser label. All of a sudden, they made themselves into special Miami Heat players. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it there, and what he did, you talk about flash in the pan players, that was it. And, he's like the Cadbury Easter egg or something. He was here for a very short season. They wound up trading him off. He was never the same player. This, to me, is a quintessential moment in time. You'll remember Antoine Walker from the Boston Celtics. Antoine Walker will never forget his championship at the Miami Heat. And we're going to move on to the Final Four, a little different Final Four. And by the way, folks, if you're scoring at home and you don't have number one, usually I want to keep the ratings and numbers up here, but you should be ashamed of yourself. So I'll let you figure out after we do these next three. Top small forward Miami Heat history. Number 4, Shane Battier, another player brought in during the championship run. Defender, guy could hit three-pointers, such an integral part to really getting this thing going. He was brought in after the lockout in 2011. Very short free agency period. You had to make a move quickly. They brought him in. He wanted to be here to finish his career. Jamal Mashburn, part of that original Heat team that had those great playoff series against the New York Knicks and couldn't get over the hump, but he was really almost the first positionalist player. Eric Spoelstra could have coached him back then with his style, and I think on a lot of other teams' lists, to be honest with you, if Glenn Rice was your number one all-time small forward, I don't think you'd have an issue with that. This is one of the guys when the game really changed toward three-point shooting. He came out of Michigan with that terrific season he had. He stepped into the NBA. He wound up doing it also in Charlotte. He wound up also doing it in New York. He went to LA for a ring. He was around the league a little bit. But he was that special kind of player where he showed how the three-point game had changed. That's when the Heat first embraced it, and now seemingly all they do is shoot three-pointers. And Emma Kate, I'm going to let you guess. Miami Heat all-time number one small forward.
Oh, there's so many players, but I think I'm going to go out on a limb here.
You're going to go on a limb here.
I say LeBron James?
Yeah, I think, again, we went to our panel of experts, and we went through that, and when you just look at everything changed. In July 2010, when the Heat decided that they can get Dwayne Wade to resign, they could bring back Chris Bosh, and then they could bring in LeBron James, and all of a sudden, you go to 4 straight NBA Finals, you wind up winning 2 championships. But here's the thing, as heartwarming as, for South Florida, the LeBron James situation was, he's almost like 2 parts of history. I think when we create best moments of Miami Heat, which we will get to in another show, LeBron's there. But you know what? He's also part of one of the worst moments in Miami Heat history. After those 4 NBA Finals appearances, that all of a sudden he goes back to Cleveland. So, again, I know Heat fans still have trouble looking at him in these uniforms and seeing that whole look and what's going on there. This is the preferred mode of attire for LeBron James. I think what you learn is in so many sports, Miami was so fortunate to have someone like Dan Marino, who made an entire career out of South Florida, had a chance to go to Minnesota, said, I don't want to be that guy and end my career that way. We have Dwayne Wade. He decided to go on to Chicago, go on to Cleveland. But you're seeing that's sort of how it is in sports these days, whether it's the Giancarlo Stanton trade to the Yankees. So I think people still to this day are angry at LeBron, and when he shows up at American Airlines Arena, some still want to boo him for turning on them. I think with LeBron, you have to sort of accept that this is today's modern sports world, that players will look for better places. And Emma Kate, how fascinating. We're talking about LeBron as the Heat all-time greatest player. We know who the Cavaliers' all-time greatest player is, LeBron James.
Same guy.
They're going through the same thing right now. If they fall short in another NBA Finals, if he doesn't make it back or loses again to the Warriors, there's a chance he's going to move on also. It's really fascinating to me how the player who's brought more joy to at least 2 cities right now also delivered heartache already to both of them, having left Cleveland. And I think when we go through these lists on the Heat's 35th and 40th anniversary, we're going to see a lot of the guys who didn't end their careers with the Heat. I think it's just the way the game is going.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think has been more impactful on the NBA as a whole? LeBron signing with the Heat in the 2010 offseason and bringing those 2 titles to Miami, or him going back to Cleveland and, starting this latest run?
And that's the whole thing. Or when you look at all these chapters, is it a case of, or will it be his next move? I mean, and that's the thing about the ultimate dominant player of our era. You watch the Christmas Day games and how good he was, even in the loss to the Warriors. Jeff Van Gundy said it, and Steve Kerr said it on that broadcast also. LeBron James right now, at 15 years in, is probably a better player than he was in his 10th NBA season. I mean, you are talking Benjamin Button right here, that by his 20th season, he might be making runs at MVP all over again. So you know what? I think as much as it meant for South Florida, and I don't mean this to be too cold, and I believe we're broadcast later in the day Central Time or later in the day in Cleveland, but South Florida got along just fine. We're still South Florida. You still wake up this time of year in December, you go outside, and you realize how good you have it. Emma Kate, I think he meant so much more for Cleveland. Because, I don't know if you know this, but people in Cleveland live in Cleveland. They've got to put up with that year-round. It's still the one city I go to. They've done a great job revitalizing downtown. And because of the Cavaliers' success, they finally have the type of restaurants. They have a casino now downtown owned by Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cavaliers. But he's resurrected that city. But when you drive in, anyone who's driven in from Hopkins from the airport there, what you pass on the way in, it makes you realize these people deserve something good in their lives. So on one hand, I think LeBron's move back to Cleveland did more to revitalize Cleveland as a city. I think what he did in South Florida is this. He revitalized the South Florida sports landscape. That's important, but it's just sports. We still have our culture. We still have our beaches. We still have our weather. If he leaves Cleveland, I know what it was like when I walked over to Quicken Loans Arena. Before that, it was Gund Arena. I can't imagine what that's going to be like. He literally could put businesses out of business by him moving on. It was desolate in downtown Cleveland. They need him to stay. It's almost like you can declare eminent domain on LeBron James. You can't leave. You're ours. We own you. It's going to be really interesting in this offseason. If Cleveland doesn't win a championship, if they're not competitive, he already told Dwayne Wade, signed for 1 year, I'm not sure I'm coming back. I think LeBron James meant more to Cleveland than he did to Miami. He was sort of our gift to borrow.
But I have to say, I'm very intrigued and excited for when he and Dwayne Wade come back, both wearing Cavaliers jerseys.
Excited? I think it's going to be I think it's going to turn a lot of stomachs down here. I think Dwayne Wade, we spoke about this on a previous show, Dwayne Wade coming back in the Chicago uniform, everyone wants to go home. That was the warm homecoming. Dwayne Wade returning alongside as sort of a bunch of henchmen there, I think is a completely different feel. I think that's going to be a cold feeling when Dwayne's alongside. And I think one thing to South Florida's credit, we've moved on. I don't think there'll be boos for LeBron James. I think people understand, hey, this team was not going to be championship caliber like it's been for the last 3 years right now in Cleveland. He went for the better thing. The one thing we're seeing, whether it's a Stanton trade in baseball or even sometimes a football player moving on, Peyton Manning moving over to the Broncos for a better chance to be in a playoff shape than he was in Indianapolis, fans understand that a little bit more right now. I think South Florida is fine with both of them. I still think it hurts a little bit because it set the Heat back, but I do believe this. As much as the Heat were set back by LeBron James' departure, I don't know what to make of the Cavaliers, but I think it's going to be a nuclear winter for Cleveland if LeBron James leaves for that franchise. Then again, but like you said, they'll always have the Browns.
Oh, yes. The always reliable Browns. What are they?
Oh, and everything. Oh, and everything is the correct answer there.
All right. So, again, so fun to look back, and we'll continue to do that every week. But let's look ahead now to the upcoming slate of games and what looks interesting to you.
Well, we reviewed the upcoming Orlando Magic games in last week's show since there are 2 this week. I'm looking at the Brooklyn Nets game for an interesting reason. The last time the Heat played the Nets, it was in Mexico City. The Heat came away with a victory there, but it's a very unusual situation. Brooklyn had been there for the previous game. They had 4 days there. Probably drank the water. Who knows? Little different. They're coming into Miami now, but since those teams played, the Nets made a big trade. They traded for Jahlil Okafor, the failed first-round pick from the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't know if he'll be ready to play yet. They're still working him back into condition. They're without D'Angelo Russell. They're without Jeremy Lin. But you know what? The reason I picked Emma-Kate the Nets was not because of who the Nets are. For this reason. If the Miami Heat want to be somebody, if they want to rise in these playoff standings, if they don't want to keep opening the paper and they're in 8th and 7th and 9th place, they've got to make a stand at home against the type of teams that they should beat. I don't mind this. They have a run right now of 7 of 8 at home. I have no issue with losing to the New Orleans Pelicans the other day. You have Anthony Davis, you have DeMarcus Cousins, you have quality players. These are the games the Heat have to win. So, I usually say, well, it's an 82-game season. Any team can lose 1 game. You cannot lose to the Brooklyn Nets on your home court if you think you're a playoff team. So to me, this Friday game at American Airlines Arena, it ends a 4-game homestand. They'll go 1 game to Orlando, come back for 3 more. This is a real litmus test to me this week. Can you win your winnable games? Last year, remember, the Heat finished 41-41, missed the playoffs by a tiebreaker to Chicago. I don't want to be sitting here the third week in April, with no playoffs, and you and I running a slideshow here of, Ira, which game got away that cost them the playoffs? Because you know what those games are? It's the 2 against Orlando, and it's this Friday home game against Brooklyn. If you are not good enough to beat the Brooklyn Nets on your home court, you might even know in December whether you're a playoff team or not.
Absolutely. Be interesting to see how the next few games shake out. So let's go.
They must destroy them. Okay.
That's what we all want to see, right? All right, so let's go a few more questions
Sure.
That we've gotten from viewers. First one, Gio in Miami asks, am I the only one extremely confused about our big men situation? Do you see a trade coming anytime soon?
Well, here's the thing. We got the good news now that Hassan Whiteside is coming back. We don't know at what shape he's going to be, or as I mentioned earlier, at what percentage. When Hassan Whiteside was playing, before he missed these recent 13 games, and before that 5 games, again with the bone bruise on the left knee, Erik Spoelstra never played 2 centers together. And by centers, I mean Hassan, Bam Adebayo, and Kelly Olynyk. Well, I think what Bam Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk showed in these intervening 13 games is they deserve minutes. You cannot divide 48 among 3 and have anyone satisfied, especially when one of those 3 is getting paid $98 million over 4 years. The Heat have to find a way to make it work for 2 of those 3 to be interchangeable and play together. That's what I need to see right now when Hassan Whiteside comes back. That might mean him playing more as a defender. It might mean Kelly Olynyk getting very difficult power forward challenges. And Aaron Gordon with Orlando, a player like that, they have to step up. But if you have talent, you can't say to yourself, positionally, it doesn't work, you sit on the bench. The math doesn't work for anyone. You want to grow Bam Adebayo as a young player, and you've seen what he's done in Hassan's absence. He's been a real revelation. So many people, the Heat needed a scorer, they needed someone else. He stepped forward. We've seen Kelly Olynyk when he plays with confidence what he can do. And even Erik Spoelstra said, stop hesitating, shoot the ball. And when he's aggressive, he's the player we remember in Boston in that playoff series against Washington. And Hassan Whiteside has to be great. He's been good. He talks about being an all-star. Stop talking the talk. Stop talking about injuries. Just be great. Make it so every week you turn to me and you're going, Ira, there's a lot else going on, but we have to talk about Hassan Whiteside again. Because that's what this team is. Who is the most special player on this roster? If it's not Hassan Whiteside, this team is in trouble. So I think you have to find a way to play all 3 of them. There is no reason that Kelly Olynyk and Bam Adebayo don't deserve minutes anymore. Hassan Whiteside does. He should be the defensive backstop for the other team's shortcomings. And you know what? It is on your coaching staff. It is incumbent on them. Find a way to make this work.
Absolutely. And speaking of Kelly Olynyk, Rich asks, Kelly Olynyk needs to stop being so passive against every opponent not named the Boston Celtics.
And that's what I was trying to refer to, and Erik Spoelstra said the same thing. Kelly Olynyk stands there, and he's open on the 3, and he doesn't pull the trigger because he's trying to be selfless. He's trying to be a passer. He's trying to be more of a teammate. No, no, no. There's a reason someone gives you, I wouldn't know this personally, but there's a reason someone gives you $50 million over 4 years. And it's to do, like almost in Forrest Gump, your special purpose. Show who you are and what you can do. So to me with Kelly Olynyk, if you're open beyond the 3-point line and you can stretch the defense, if you're playing alongside Hassan Whiteside and you can open the lane for him, to me it's almost a fiduciary obligation for him to pull the trigger on those 3-pointers. And I love what Erik Spoelstra said. I'd like to see him shoot 8 3-pointers. And we said to Erik, so you mean 8 good 3-point looks? He goes, no, any 8 3-pointers, just lock and load and shoot. Because what makes Kelly Olynyk special? That's the thing. What makes Hassan Whiteside special? His physical, imposing way. To a degree, the same thing with Bam Adebayo, who has a nice little mid-range touch. What makes Kelly Olynyk special? Beyond the hair, whether he goes bun or whether he goes tied back, that's another story, is his outside shooting. That's what makes him a unique player. Kelly Olynyk has to shoot more. There can't be groans at American Airlines Arena. I'm talking to you folks out there. When he shoots those 3-pointers, that's what he's here for. That's what he does. That's what opens the floor for Goran Dragic, for Dion Waiters when he's healthy, for other guys to attack the rim. So I think they've got to get Kelly Olynyk to be a little more aggressive. Look, he's had his 2 months to come in, to feel comfortable, to work on a tan. Not going very well either, but at least he's been down here now. Now they got to get him to shoot the ball.
Absolutely. All right. Aaron asks, why do the Heat beat top teams then lose to lesser opponents?
I think because of the inconsistency of the lineup. I mean, we're talking right now that Hassan Whiteside is finally coming back. The Heat to this point haven't had a chance to know who they are. I believe they're up to 10 starting lineups, might even be another one coming this week also because of Hassan coming back. You have to find out who you are and what you are. The teams who win in the NBA, Whether it's beating the good teams or the bad teams, you win because of lineup stability. The Heat have to get to that. And this is the worst time for me to talk to you about this, because Dion Waiters is out, because James Johnson is out again, because Justice Winslow is out again. You have to get to your special five-man group. You have to find out who your players are. And that's why the Whiteside thing, Emma Kate, is so important now. I don't care if you're 100%. Be 90, be 80, but be out there. I need to judge who do we have and what do we have. Because you know what? That February 8 trading deadline is going to be here sooner than we think. And if you do need to make a move, you need to know now what combination works, what combinations don't work. So it's almost a point like, I know people are against steroids and other little things, but you know what? Shoot them up and get them all back on the court, because the Heat need to know what they have.
There you go. You heard it here.
Advocating
get them on the court.
Advocating all kinds of illegalness.
Hey, whatever it takes to get that guy out
Horse
on the court
pills,
so
I'm all for it.
figure
Sure.
out who they are.
You know what? We're sitting here last show in December trying to figure out who they are right now. That's the whole thing about the Heat. That's been the problem. After the break, Christmas break, coming 16 and 15, that's all you wanted to do was hold your ground, stay above water, which they did. But eventually you got to know, who is this Heat team? What is this Heat team? No playoffs last year, losing in a tiebreaker. You've got to find out who you are. You've got to have the word that Eric Spoelstra uses over and over again. What is your identity? We've seen a Dolphins team go a full season without ever establishing an identity. You know what? In mid-season, about mid-January, the Miami Heat will have to know, who are you?
Got a little bit of time, but the clock is definitely ticking on that one. All right, we have time for one more question. OB says, you only get a 30-11 finish from this type of team when a majority of guys are in contract years, which they were. Once they get the contracts, it's a different story. Human nature.
See, I find that to be so cold, because you have to know who you're signing the contracts to. If you're signing the contracts to guys who become content, who become fat on their contracts, of which no one is that I know right now, that's the concern. I think the Heat vetted everyone. And they said, if we give you the money, will you be a different player? And to their credit, we spoke about Dion Waiters didn't have surgery. He wanted to play. James Johnson came back for that game against the New Orleans Pelicans. He wasn't 100%. He wanted to be out there. The guys who have gotten the money, Kelly Olynyk has pushed through minimal minutes, playing major minutes. They want to be there. I don't think that anyone here got fat on last season's record. I think what happened with this team is they never got to find out who they are. They never got to establish the chemistry. We're talking 10 starting lineups at this point already, and we're already almost at mid-season, at mid-January. I think more than the money changed the dynamic, it's been the injuries, which is not unusual in the NBA. It's been the changing lineups. It's been working in two key new components in Bam Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk. And while people will say, we spoke about this, Christmas after the break is when the NBA season really starts, I think it's by mid-season. And even if this Heat team is 21-20 at midseason, I'm fine with that. Because the one thing that Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley's teams have shown, they are so well conditioned, they are so well drilled that the second half of the season, which I believe again will make the difference. So I think there's enough here. I don't think the guys got fat on their contracts. Unfortunately, with Dion and with James Johnson, they might have gotten injured. And that's something a lot harder to overcome than guys getting fat on contracts.
Well, we're interested to see how the games go in this latest home stretch, and then, of course, that game in Orlando. Ira, thanks again for coming into the studio. We know you're very busy, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Off to another game, but it really is interesting because, like I said, after Christmas, people are starting to pay attention. Apparently, football is winding down. I think we're going to get a read on who the Miami Heat is pretty soon, or else we're going to have to start talking baseball or something.
Oh, please, not yet. Let's stick with basketball for a little bit longer. Thanks again for joining us. Keep submitting those questions. We'll be here again next week. And thanks so much for joining us.